Hello, this workshop is part of the Data Analysis and Visualization series, and it's about using Tableau to prep your data. All of the files and the handout for this workshop can be found at this URL, which is libguides.uta.edu/Davis, which is Data Analysis and Viz for short. If you scroll down and use the Tableau tab, you can then see all of the files as well as the handout. And the handout looks like this, and it actually walks you through step by step of the instructions. So hopefully with both the handout and the video, you're able to get what you need from this. Okay, so what is tidy data? Tidy data is this idea of organizing your data into columns. Tidy data is especially useful for data analysis and visualization, whereas wide data or other types of layouts of data are more easily used for like data entry or kind of regularly updating data. Now, the blue tables here represent wide data, and as you can see, they go through a process to come out as one green table, which is our tidy data. So if you see the first table, you can see that, for example, let's say there's some food scientists working and they're assessing how they compile different food items, and they're looking at the spices that they use. And so for the first item that they're baking, maybe they're measuring in a spreadsheet the various spices. And then for the second item, they do the same thing. They get a new spreadsheet or a new tab, and they once again start looking at those spices. So this is something where you would say this is breaking some of the tidy data rules. Once again, tidy data is this idea of putting things into columns. So as you can see, as we move over to the right, instead of having the names of the spices over the top of the measurements, you have a column for the measurements in themselves. And this can be the same for any type of data, whether you're representing percentages, rates, or any total values or averages. You would put those numbers underneath what that number is in the heading, and then you would break things up according to those variables. So instead of having the spices going across the top, we have a column called spice that lists all of the spices. Now, tidy data is also called long data, and you can see why. It's very tall. Right now, I only have 2 of the spices visible, cinnamon and cardamom, and this goes on to nutmeg, which doesn't even have room. And then you can also see this idea with one having either multiple data sets that are the same for like a different variable, like the item number, or having, I've seen a lot of color coding. Color coding always means you need a new column. So in this case, we take that information, and instead of having it in separate spreadsheets, we have a column called item where those item numbers are distinguished. So how do we create tidy data in Tableau? Well, for this workshop, we're going to work with data sets that are mostly tidy. However, there's one data set that needs a little bit of work. So we're going to open it. I'm going to open the CSV file in Excel just so that you can quickly view the data. And this is data from the World Health Organization. You can see here that they're providing some sort of number along with a standard deviation. If you're not familiar with standard deviation, you can see the estimate for this is BMI. So BMI for Afghanistan is 23.4. And then you can see the standard deviation range behind it. In this case, we're going to be visualizing this data, so we're not going to need the standard deviation. You'll also notice this is made for display or for data entry. So you can see that across the top, you have both the year and the sexes listed within the same column, which is the third way that you can break the tidy data rules. So we're going to need to split that information up, and we're going to need to create basically a column for country, which we already have, a column for year, and a column for sex. And then all of these numbers will fall under its own column called BMI. All right, so now let's figure out how to do this in Tableau. Now what we're about to do is often called melting data. In R, it's called melting data. In Tableau, it's called pivoting file. It's considered a text file, so we will open up by opening text file and then selecting this BMI data set. So you can see here, it says BMI. And then it's going to load that data set. Hopefully that looks familiar to when you opened it in Excel, and you can see all the variables are still kind of not appropriately laid out. So to pivot the data, I'm going to go and I'm going to click that first column that needs pivoting. So you may, in this case, I only have one column that does not. You might have multiple. So maybe you have other data about Afghanistan listed here, and then it starts going into all the BMIs. You would only click that first column. Click the first column, and then I'm going to scroll all the way to the end. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select that last column. So now I have all the year sex columns selected. I'm going to right click the header and I'm going to choose to pivot. Now you'll see that that data has been tidied or made long because we went from 194 rows to 1,000. Now this is a preview, so it's not going to show you all of your rows, but these years go from 1975 all the way up to, I believe, 2018. Now that we've pivoted, we'll want to split these. We want to have the BMI separate from the standard deviation, and we want to have the year separate from the sex. So to split a column, you'll hit the down arrow, and we're going to choose a custom split because we want to tell it how to split. So in this case, BMI and the BMI range are separated by a space. There's actually no other spaces in here. So that's a great way to split those two values. Now in Tableau, Tableau is a little different. You need to specify the number of columns that you want. Depending on the tool that you're using, some tools automatically split every time they see a space, whereas other tools only split the number that you specify in addition to one column. In this case, you have to specify the total number of columns that you end up with. So since I've selected, I've put a space here, I've put a 2 here, and then I hit OK. Now it's going to take this column and it's going to split it into 2 columns using that space. Now I'm not going to use this, but I'm going to rename it just so that I can remember what it is. I just double click and give it a new name. So in this case, this is the BMI, which is a number. And I'm going to hide this because I don't need it anymore. All right, we split that first column, so let's go ahead and split the other one. If you remember, we're going to go up to the down arrow, hit custom split. In this case, I'm going to split it by a space, even though there's a space after the word both and then before sexes. What that's going to do is it's going to take away the word sexes. However, I don't need that for this specific case. If you were to need that, there are ways to use calculated fields. I highly recommend using a calculated field where you can then create a column based off of this previous column and split it how you need to. However, in this case, if I hit the space bar here and I select 2 columns here, you're going to see that both is really just as descriptive as both sexes in our case. So I'm going to call this sex, and I'm going to call this year, and I'm going to hide this, and now our data are in the format that we need. Now, some of the things that you may have seen me do are change the values here. So this was represented as a string, which means basically characters that don't have any sort of value to them other than their uniqueness. We're going to change from a string to a number, which means that they are something that can be added, divided, averaged, and so on. Country, you'll want to make sure is represented as a geographic. In this case, it automatically recognized it that it was a country. And you can see here some of the options that Tableau has, which unfortunately does not include continent, which I thought was interesting. Also needing correction is year, so we'll make sure a year is represented as a date, so it will recognize that as we are creating visuals off of this. Now that our BMI data is clean, all of our other data sets are clean, so we can continue and make joins with our data set. So I'm going to go ahead and join it with the second file that I downloaded, which is the continent data. The reason that I want to join with this one is because this data set is unique from all of them in that it has both the country name and the country code, which in this case they call it the 3-letter country code, which all of the other data sets only have the country code. So in order to connect it with this very first BMI data set, we'll need to get that country code added here so that it can recognize each column. Now, once you've dragged those on there, you're going to want to select how they're going to match with each other. In this case, as I mentioned, that first data set, as you recall, has only country names, whereas the second data set also has country names. So once I select that, you can see it matches the country with the country name, and it appends this information. So the country number, the 3-letter country code, and so on is now added along with which continent that country is found in. Now in this case, I did an inner join, which means anytime that they're matching, add that row. I don't necessarily need that. I could do a left join, which means keep all of the data from the left and only add data on the right if it matches something on the left. Right join is the same thing except the opposite, and a full outer join includes all the data that's there, and so when there's no match, you'll get a bunch of nulls on the side that there's no match. So as you can see, that's a pretty easy way to join data. If you have desktop, you can actually go down here and download your data. So that could be all that you need to do in Tableau, which is to quickly do some restructuring of your data and download it for an analysis or for something else. I'm going to go ahead and join it with another data set, which has like the GDP. So I will go ahead and join my left data, which you can recall now that the left data has both the original data and the appended data. So as I recall, the data sets that I have left only have country code, which is the 3-letter in this case. So I'm going to choose the 3-letter country code, and I'm going to match it to the other data set using country code. And once again, I'm only going to keep the information that I need, and I'm going to do a left join. So now you can see I've got the country name, I have the country code, and now using the country code from this new data set, I've been able to add the GDP, which is over here. So you can see that. Feel free to continue working with the data sets, joining as you wish. I'm going to hit this extract button because this is going to allow me to publish my data along with my Tableau visualizations in Tableau Public. But really, sorry, I just need to save this real quick. But really, that was the main point of this workshop. And I challenge you to keep thinking of new ways that you can combine data and that you can work with data. Once your data is loaded, you can click Sheet 1 here at the bottom. That will start a new worksheet. Now, a new worksheet will always start a new chart. So every time you need to add a new chart, you can keep adding sheets using this little picture of a bar chart with a plus sign in front of it, and add as many sheets as you need. I'm going to right click and delete these because I don't need them at the moment, but that's just how you'll add a sheet. I typically like to name my sheets at the bottom because it reflects in other places that the sheet is found, including the title. So I can do BMI by country in North America. And as you can see, the title changes there. Now, to map in Tableau, you always have to drag the geo data onto the center of the chart in order to create a map. If you were to drag it up to columns or rows, it would make a list of all the countries that are in your data set. Now, since I'm only going to look at North America, I'm going to drag country to filter because I want to filter just to the countries in North America, which are Canada, Mexico, and the United States of America. Now, when I filter, it's going to only show me these states. The reason it's only giving me a dot is it's saying, yes, we have that country in the data set. What do you want to know about it? There are lots of things you can do. You can make the dot change size based on BMI, GDP, and so on. In this case, I like colors. So instead of doing the dots, which are, you can see here which one you have selected, I'm going to do color. So in order to do color, I'd like to see the BMI for each country, and I'll drag BMI. Oops, going backwards. BMI is not being recognized as a measure, which is like a quantifiable thing. You can tell because it's still blue. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to a measure. So I'll hit the little down arrow and I'll convert to measure. And now you'll find it down here so that when I drag it to color, it will now color my countries by BMI. Obviously, the United States has a higher BMI, which I need to switch from sum to average. And now you can see the average BMI. And what it's averaging here are the male, female, and both. So technically, if you wanted to accurately portray it, you would have just filtered this to both. Now, I'm not going to filter to both because I want to show you a really cool feature. So I'm going to hit OK. And that's going to filter, but I can also show the filter, which means that when I publish this chart, people can choose what they want to see. So if they want to just see female only, if they want to see male only, or both, they can personally check the box and choose to see what they would like to see. Now you can edit the colors by, since you're coloring by a variable, your key is going to be on the right, and so you're going to edit the colors by hitting the down arrow on the right. Now, if you didn't have anything by color there, you can also click here and hit edit colors. I can select different colors. I can make this kind of how I want it already, is dark. I can change it to a different range. I can actually segment the colors. So I could say stepped color. I only want 5 colors, which isn't very useful because we're only doing 3 states, but you can do it however you like and emphasize the data that you would like to. All right, so once you have BMI, you can then create a calculated field. You can create calculated fields with all kinds of things. You can, I often use them to create short versions of things, longer versions of things that might be placed in different places. So maybe on the actual chart, I want a smaller version of a name of something, an abbreviated version. But when they highlight their mouse over it, I want the full name, so I can create a new field with that full name that lines up with the old one. You can also do that by joining tables. There are lots of tables on the internet of things like a state right next to its abbreviation, like Texas TX. Instead of you manually typing those in, you would just join that table to the full state name table, and now you would have the abbreviations available to you. So I'm going to create a calculated field from BMI, and I'm going to call it the BMI range. So as we know, there are different ways that we can look at BMI as like low, normal, high, and I'm guessing here, I think low BMI is under 19, but that's not the point of this demonstration, and high is over 25. But I'm basically taking the average BMI of a country, and I'm saying if it is below 19, then code this column as low. Also, if it's over 25, then code the column as high. For everything else, code the column as normal, which should catch everything in between. However, please take note, it can capture null values. So you'll want to use something like if null if you have any null values, and then you can code those ones properly. However, we don't have any, so we're going to go forward with the code as it is. And if you ever can't find this little dictionary, you can always hit the little arrow, which will provide you with names of operations, the format of the operation, the definition, and an example. All right, so now that I have BMI range, let's say I want to add it here. So I want to still color them by the BMI, but I also want to add this information. When someone highlights their mouse over it, they can see what range is there. I can drag BMI range onto tooltip, and now you'll see the tooltip has changed to provide the BMI range. I can even go so far as to click tooltip and say the average BMI I'm just pasting that in there for this country is space. I'm just copying the formatting here. And now when I highlight, the average BMI for Canada is high. The average BMI for the United States is high. All right, so next we'll show how you can combine that information together. So we can also look at how these have changed over years. So I can move a year to column. I'm going to go ahead and move the one that I've already marked as a date. You can tell by this icon. And then I'm going to filter to just the countries I'm interested in. The reason I'm doing that is because this is a pretty large data set with lots of countries, and it can slow things down a lot if you're visualizing first before filtering. So I'm going to filter first. To the 3 countries that I need, and I'm going to hit OK. And now when I drag BMI here, we get a line chart. Now, one of the things that's a little strange about Tableau is that, sorry, I'm just changing this to an average, is that the only way to create multiple lines on a chart is to make the one big line chart first, and then select what you want to divide each line up by, which in my case is the countries, and then highlight or move that pill onto your chart. That's the only way to make multiple lines all on the same chart versus a whole bunch of little charts with one line. So now that line is broken up by country, and you can see these countries here. I can edit the axis by right-clicking and hitting Edit Axis and giving it a higher start. Since the numbers kind of start up here, we'll start it at 20, which makes good sense since we're talking about BMIs. You don't usually see average BMIs below, really like 17, 16 for more impoverished countries. In this case, we're talking about North America, so we can start the BMIs a little higher in this case since it's a line chart. And you can see the rate of change. Now let's say you want to directly label these lines with their data. You can drag any variable here and it will label those lines wherever there is data. In this case, I want to label the lines with the country name. So I'll take country again, drag it on the label, and you can see the label name. I usually like having the label at the beginning. So I'm going to put these labels here, and I'm going to hide these other ones. Oops. I'm also going to want to match these to the color of their line. So if I hit label, font, and then match mark color, Then I can make it match the color of the line. I can make the font a little bigger. I can choose a different font if I wanted to. And now you can see that these lines now reflect some of the data that we found. Now to publish your visualizations, I'm going to go ahead and rename this. And I can create a dashboard by using this little button of kind of a bunch of squares together with a plus sign. And my charts are now here on the left. I can drag them on. I can kind of figure out where I want them to be. They automatically start in this tiled manner where they kind of fill their section. However, you can do floating where you choose where they go. I'm going to remove this key since these are already directly labeled. And I might move Canada a little bit so we can see you. I'm also going to make these floating. And now some of these things are floating on the page instead of taking up a whole column. You can also make these apply to all the worksheets. So if somebody were to select female, it changes the line chart as well as the map, or selects male, and so on. Once we're done, we can publish to Tableau Public. If you're using the Tableau Public software, you'll want to choose Publish instead of Server here. And if you're using Tableau Desktop, you'll go to Server, Tableau Public, and save to Tableau Public. You'll give it a name. And that's going to automatically save your visualization into Tableau Public. Now, of course, we visualize just for fun. You may or may not need to do that. However, just take note that we were able to do that visualization or that data cleaning very quickly and very efficiently without very many steps and without pretty much any manual labor. So I highly recommend checking out Tableau for that reason alone. And then you can go in and create visualizations if you want, or just export the data if you have Tableau Desktop and use it how you need to. Thank you so much.